There are two basic motivating forces, fear and love. When we're afraid, we pull back from life. When we're in love, we open up to all that life has to offer with passion, excitement, and acceptance.
Coming to you from our studio in Santa Barbara, California, this is the Fear Me Out podcast. We're not your typical self-help program. Our show takes a deep dive into those psychological issues that affect us on a daily basis. We hope to shift your perspective and have you experiencing emotions differently. Now here are your hosts, Kim Foskey and Dr. Dana Saperstein.
Hey folks, welcome to episode number 3. On today's show, you'll hear not only from Dana and I, but a special in-studio guest as well, as we continue our discussion on the importance of living a self-examined life. Amy Cooper is a successful entrepreneur, business consultant, and mother who through life's many trials and tribulations has had the opportunity over the course of her life to deeply explore her inner being and live an examined life. We hope you enjoy our conversation with Amy as much as we did. All right, Amy, welcome.
Thank you.
So why don't you tell our listeners, who is Amy Cooper?
Oh my goodness. I mean, don't you have any more specific questions? I could go on and on.
Well, I can sit there and tell you my perception of Amy Cooper, but that's only my perception of Amy Cooper. I'm more interested on who Amy Cooper is from Amy Cooper.
Okay, Amy Cooper from Amy Cooper. I was born and raised here in California and have lived in California my whole life, and originally from the Bay Area, and then married a Santa Barbarian and landed in Santa Barbara 27 years ago. And I'm an entrepreneur and a mom and a daughter and a friend. And yeah, there's a lot I could say about my professional or personal life. So I'll leave it to you.
Please continue.
Well, I will tell you that my first professional job, which really probably tells you a lot about me, was in San Francisco. I really wanted to work in public relations or advertising, but I hadn't graduated from college yet. So I had taken a year off school and I was trying to get into that business to see if I liked it. But imagine I'm 20 years old, I have no experience. And I answer, finally, I just need to pay the rent. So I answer a random ad for a receptionist. And I'm interviewing and right away they tell me it's a PR firm. So my eyes light up. But the interview person says, gosh, I have a really hard time keeping receptionists. They all want to go into the business. So do you want to go into the business? And I said, absolutely not. And so within 6 months, I was a junior associate there. But I was still answering the phones, and then fax machines were huge back then, so I was in charge of the fax. And then I started writing press releases, and really writing is what advanced my career over and over and over again. There's always a need for great writing, and I happen to have that skill naturally. So worked in PR in San Francisco for many years, in event planning and corporate communications, and that's been the foundation of my career. But that idea that I had the tenacity to be pursuing what I wanted to do, but I also had the realistic sense, okay, now I just have to pay my rent, and then I got really lucky. So that sums up a lot of how my life has gone.
And it was only with one white lie.
It's only with one white lie. I think I did consult my dad before and said, if they ask me that, what can I say? And he said, make them glad they hired you, which I did.
It's good advice.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your upbringing.
My upbringing, one sister, one brother, one father, one mother, and raised in the Bay Area. And another quirky thing about me was I was born with a strawberry mark like Gorbachev has on his head, but mine grew into a big, big lump on the side of my face. And apparently they wouldn't have been able to take it off until I was in high school at the time. That's what they told my parents. So that would have been a very different experience. But it turned out I lived in Palo Alto, and Stanford Children's Hospital was there. And at 8 years old, they said, oh, you know what? We've figured out the technology to do the surgery. And they interviewed me at 8 and to see if I could tolerate being awake for the surgery. Because if I was awake for the surgery, I wouldn't have to stay overnight. And the doctor came out and said, yeah, she's fine. She'll have no problem. So at 8, I was already pretty
you had built-in
fearless.
resilience already,
I had
right?
built-in resilience and fearless. I was the third, the youngest. I'd already gotten bullied and pushed around by my older sibling. So I had that tenacity, I think, at that age. So I remember that surgery, yeah.
You weren't raised in the, what we think is the quintessential Beaver, Cleaver, or Ozzie and Harriet family, however, though.
I mean, a little bit. I think in the early years we weren't, we were kind of that typical white bread, Presbyterian-ish, went camping and California lifestyle. And then when I was 9 years old, we moved to San Diego. And then shortly after that, my parents' marriage fell apart. And that's when the whole dynamic changed, of course, within the family. Because my dad was gone, and then my sister was gone.
Was your dad out of the picture completely? Or?
No, he was not out of he was there. He was around. But it was, in those days, I mean, you were just full custody with mom. There was no question that, you might see dad for a little, fun trip to have dinner or something, but the custody was with mom. So I lived with my mom. Actually, I think I was about 12 when they got divorced, but I think the marriage was falling apart between 10 and 12. And my sister's 8 years older than I am. So she was already gone, and then my brother was in high school, and it went from this intact unit to really splintering by about age 10 or 11.
And this may seem like an obvious question, but how did it affect you personally? Parents divorcing, especially as you're reaching teenage years as a female.
Of course, in hindsight and with great exploration of self, that's a brutal time to have when you're just discovering your own sexuality or becoming a young woman, to have your dad cheating on your mom, leave your mom's just gutted and devastating and telling you, by the way, don't ever trust a man or you'll end up like this. And then also just in that phase, I was really planning to be a professional dancer. So I'd committed my life to dance, and I was dancing full time and getting offered scholarships. But I dropped out of dance right around 13, right after my dad moved out. And I realize now it was because I just didn't have the home stability to feel that I could be out there pursuing what I wanted to do. And so it changed how I felt about myself, how I felt about relationships and marriage. And certainly, suddenly, it went from a family to a really broken and devastated mother figure and a father figure who's off now in love with somebody else. And then my brother shortly thereafter went away to college. He'd been my main ally at that point. So I was left completely alone by 13.
So how do you deal with that? You're going through puberty on your own. Do you have parents and a family?
My mom was, what's good about my mom, as much as, she was devastated, is she was discovering herself as a newborn feminist, right? So she was throwing me a period party with her closest women friends with pink roses. And, there was some great little pieces there where I suddenly got a bunch of other kind of mom figures in the mix.
Good for mom.
Yeah. And, so there was a lot of that. She was exploring what it meant. She came from a 1950s housewife scenario. So she was starting to discover who she was, and I had the benefit of that. So there were some benefits during that time. And the other part of it is that as much as it was brutal to be on my own, now I'm looked to as someone to count on and rely on, and also someone to be celebrated. So I started to have a lot of confidence in what I had to say and what I thought, which has still driven me to this day. So when you have your dad's gone, your brother and sister are gone, and your mom's saying, what should I do? The more you're figuring that out, yes, it's an incredible burden and stressful. On the other hand, you're building a lot of confidence in your decision making.
Did you ever feel like you had to become an adult before you were ready?
1,000% I did. Yeah, 1,000% I did.
Was it mostly? I'm sorry.
Go ahead. I was going to say, I remember I have a really vivid, probably the most painful memory that I can see in my mind from that time is walking up the walkway towards my house after school, feeling so sick and so scared, knowing that my mom would be waiting for me to come home from school, and waiting for me to meet her emotional needs or cheer her up or comfort her, and feeling so trapped and panicked walking up that walkway.
So how did you handle that over the long period of time?
I was very stressed and very independent, and didn't ask for help, didn't really know I could ask for help. That's a definite continued character defect of mine. And I then relied a lot on my best childhood friend, who was like my family friend, who I'm still very close with.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you ever sort of feel hopeless and depressed and anxious as a result of all of that?
Those feelings all came out later in life, especially after the birth of my daughter, when all of that being relied upon and overwhelmed by someone else, all of it was triggered again. I think at that time, I didn't I hate to say didn't get to. I didn't get to be sad or depressed or have feelings. It was all about her.
Okay.
And if I wasn't keeping her alive, then I had nothing. So, I mean, I didn't even, I remember even early in my marriage, I joined Al-Anon family and friends of alcoholics because a lot of people in my family have addiction issues. And I remember them saying, well, you know, first thing is to know what you need and say what you need. And I mean, I was in my 30s and I was like, oh my goodness, I don't even know if I know what I truly feel or need at any given time. I'm so used to being responsive to someone else.
Right.
Yeah.
Pretty overwhelming.
Extremely. But the birth of my daughter then triggered that in a much more profound way than it did when I was younger, because I'd been carrying on to a certain degree and then couldn't carry on anymore after that.
So how old were you when you first decided you wanted to look at yourself and explore who you were and deal with some of the trauma that you suffered?
Let's see. When did I first? I think I went to, I briefly saw a therapist early on in my marriage when there were some issues going on and didn't find that really that satisfying or helpful, and was struggling after the birth of my daughter and had really severe postpartum depression, but they were treating it more medically, you know, putting me on antidepressants and other, you know, watch your nutrition and your thyroid is going up and down and things like that. But it wasn't more spiritual or psychological. And then my daughter was about 2 or so, and I was talking to my sister who had been at that point in recovery for 20 plus years. And she said, you know, you should really consider going to a 12-step program for adult children of alcoholics, adult children of addiction and dysfunction. And she had suggested it before, and I'd not thought it was relevant. I really laughingly thought I was the together one, you know, in the family. Look at me, I'm so competent. And but at that point, she said something that changed everything for me. She said, you know, I said, oh, I don't know if that relates to me. And she said, what if it's just a new tool that you have in your toolbox? It's a new set of tools. And you've used all the tools that you have so far, so this is adding some new tools in. And that really spoke to me. And so I went up because she was running a rehab center in Canada where she lives, and they have a family program. And so I got to do the program for free. So it was an immersive week-long program. And that's when my mind was blown about how much of what I thought to just be who I was actually just a reaction to my family system.
Right. So that kind of opened you up to the notion that maybe there were things that needed to be addressed inside of you.
Yeah. That was it. I really saw the perfectionism and the controlling nature and the codependency and the hypervigilance and all of these things. I could see how they were created and also start to say, is this really who I am? Or what pieces of these do I want to carry forward, or what pieces could I change? So after a couple years in Al-Anon, that's when I started to do a lot more psychological, spiritual exploration of myself.
And did you do that by yourself, or did you find someone to help you?
Both. I mean, in Al-Anon, you have a great tribe of people, and I worked through that program and their steps. And then as my marriage fell apart, I mean, really in part because I started to actually become present to what was going on in my marriage, which was not okay, and start to know, okay, this is not okay, and whereas before I thought maybe my marriage wasn't okay because I didn't know how to ask for what I needed or wanted. Then when I was able to ask for what I needed or wanted, then it was, oh, it's not here. You know, as they say in program, it's going to the hardware store for a loaf of bread. There was no bread to be had in that marriage. So first I had to get to the point where I could say, oh, I deserve to ask for things. I deserve to have some needs met. When the answer was a complete no, then when I was about to leave, he said, I'll go to marriage therapy. But by then it was too late. So we did explore that. And from there, I continued on and then ended up getting a personal therapist right when I left that marriage that was really, really profoundly impactful. Dr. Kimberly Taylor here in Santa Barbara.
I want to go back a little bit to your adolescence and living with a mom that had anxiety and other related issues either before or after the divorce. Mm-hmm. Did you have any physical signs of depression or anxiety or anything that was affecting you physically?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that's so interesting, how it shows up physically. I did not then, but freshman year in college, when my mom was still relying on me calling me deeply disturbed or upset to want to talk on the phone for 3 hours at a time while I'm in the dorm room, I started to have severe stomach issues, which of course I didn't at the time. I was like, oh, I just, but now I see it as just a strong anxiety response. So I struggled with stomach issues off and on, and that then continued on, and now I have an autoimmune disorder. But I do think that the stress to my nervous system and my physical being, I've been told I have PTSD from all of that. So that does take a huge toll on your adrenals and cortisol and body. And
Absolutely.
And I think that those effects are now showing up now that I'm in my 50s, way more than they did before.
Dana and I talk a lot about it's our reaction to fear. It's our reaction to a lot of the psychological things, and not the actual symptom itself, right?
That's true.
And so we talk a lot about managing it through intuition and spirituality. Were you raised in a religious family at all? Was there any?
I mean, as I said, we were like casual Presbyterians, I mean, we kind of went, but there was no real religion. But then when my mom got really into feminism and all that and started to explore who she was, she had a more spiritual nature. And so I followed along with that a little bit. But I wouldn't say I had a real spiritual connection until I got into the 12-step program, and was quite a few years into that, where I started to feel that I could have and really only in the past 5 years, that I have a strong meditation practice, that I have feel like there's something bigger than me. I mean, of course, this is so classic. If you don't have parents you can depend on, very hard to get a sense of any kind of spiritual, like there's anyone out there. You're like, I'm on my own. I've been on my own since the get-go. And it's a big concept to start to trust in something bigger than yourself. But I do feel like that's where the ease comes in of it's not all up to me. So my core sense is always going to be it's 100% up to me. And I have to battle with that because that's so strongly ingrained from when I was little.
And how about listening to your intuition? Was that something that you learned earlier or later?
Actually, I learned that early, because think when you're 13 and your mother's asking you to do things that you have no idea how to do, I got a really strong sense to my gut, which still has, again, served me to this day, that I have a strong intuition and a strong sense. I remember I was in my 20s. I was at a PR firm, not the first one, but one of the later ones I was at. And my boss, who was, 20 years older than me, said, I watch you make decisions and you're so good. How do you do that? And I said, I just use this gut sense that I developed, and maybe it's like street smarts or something.
Were you aware of it at the time, or was it just an innate sort of a thing that you developed as a survival mechanism?
Survival mechanism for sure, but I knew I could count on it. I know I can count on myself.
Okay.
And I can count on myself to make good decisions, not 100% of the time, but I can. It's so finely tuned now. I was just, if I reach her phone to text, I'll get this, nope, or yep. I have a really strong gut instinct that probably was initially a survival mechanism.
Okay. One of the premises that Kim and I have developed is the notion that your intuition can be the voice of God inside of you, and that the more you're connected to your intuition, the more your life will work the way you're describing it.
Yeah. That
you treat it as though it's a very sacred part of who you are, and that you do the best you can to trust it implicitly and allow it to be one of the central ways that you live your life.
Yeah.
It's certainly one of the best ways that we've found for people to manage their fear in a graceful way. Because then you're not going up against your fear. You're just looking at your fear as a way of helping you understand that what you might be doing is uncomfortable. But if you're really connected to yourself, it makes it easier to figure out how you're going to deal with that discomfort.
Yeah.
Does that sound familiar to you at all?
Yeah, very much so. And that's, again, a 12-step principle of the align my will to thine. And so the idea isn't this magical sky daddy. The idea is that there's an overall greater force of love and connection, and that you have that within yourself, and that you can trust that, and that you are asking for that level of guidance every day. And sometimes you're listening to it a little bit better than others. Sometimes it gets muffled by other things, but that when you try to align with that, your life flows much more easily. And you also don't feel so gripped. That's when I know I'm out of connection with that sense, is when I have that sense of grip versus sense of I can trust what's going on and follow that flow.
What do you mean by grip?
So grip is my feeling internally. It's like you think of clenching up And it's I can't really listen to any information, including if it's coming from myself, because I'm in fear or I'm too attached to outcome.
Okay.
So one of the ways that disconnects me from that gut or intuition is to get either into ego or outcome, expectation, of course, fear as well. But fear, like to your point, fear can serve a really good, fear, false evidence appearing real, however you want to think of it.
It's really a neutral emotion.
It's a neutral emotion. And it could also be, speaking of fear of intimacy, which is a different conversation, fear can be from telling you the wrong message. The fear can be, I'm trying to protect you from being seen. I'm trying to protect you from feeling vulnerable, when in fact you should move towards that.
Right.
So,
that's generally your ego that's trying to override your intuition on that.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Do you do anything to sort of enhance your intuition, or did it just happen through desperation and the necessity of having to take care of your mom and keep her alive?
Yeah, I think that formative experience, and then me launching into a professional career where often I was the only woman in the room, where often I was younger than other people, and then becoming, getting married, having a baby, having your own business, and these are things you've never done before. So every step of the way, I've learned to trust more and more on my gut and my intuition. And in fact, when I had my own business for 10 years, people would say, isn't that stressful? I find it 10 billion times more stressful to work for other people and have them making decisions that I either agree with or don't, or that are changing all the time, or that don't make sense. When I was making my own decisions, hey, if I fail, I fail, but at least I made the best choice I could at the time. When I'm having to follow other people's decisions and I feel like it's the wrong direction, it's a lot harder for me.
That makes you the true entrepreneur.
Yeah, but and that has its downsides too, right? Then you're out there on your own, and there's a lot of burden on you.
You carry all the risk and responsibility.
Right.
With that.
But it's interesting now as I'm saying it, because I hadn't thought of it this way before, that of course I'm more comfortable with that model, because that mirrors, what I'm used to.
So I'm kind of interested. How did your mom get healthy?
Oh, yeah. She's such a gem. You should interview her. She is just...
I like your mom.
She is so funny and smart. She got into a relationship after the marriage that was really impactful, but also I think would kind of emotionally brought her to her knees, and she started to seek help. She was already interested in the psychological realm. She always read different books about that. But.
Someone similar to your father?
No, exact
completely
opposite.
Different.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's the original cougar. Poor mom. She was 42. I think he was 20.
Wow.
They met in college because she went back to school to finish her degree, and they were together 8 years. And really big love story. But then it went into an addiction situation, and she decided,
for your mom or her partner?
Both kind of. I don't know. I can't speak for him. And she decided to seek recovery, and that changed everything because, once she went into recovery, then she had a whole different way to look at herself and her life and principles, and she sponsors a lot of people and is really impactful in that realm, and she really became a whole different person, and has made amends, and we've had all those conversations. So I'm so lucky to have had that opportunity with her, and so now she's like my biggest champion and ally.
Did you ever come to a point prior to your mom or the relationship with your mom changing in a positive way? Did you ever come up to a point where you weren't sure whether you could have a relationship going forward with her?
No, I was too, no, absolutely not. That would never have occurred to me. She got recovery way before I did and got into any therapy. So, I was just devoted to her. So.
Was she able to take responsibility for what she was like
Absolutely.
when you were?
Yeah. It's quite painful for her, as you might imagine.
I can imagine. It sounds like she was in a really dark place.
She was.
She took advantage
of you think back to her childhood, and her mom was a really abusive alcoholic who, it was, just horrific to her. And then she, married my father under duress, accident, pregnancy. He made it clear he didn't want to marry her. Her self-esteem was on the floor. So she was working with this, I think of her almost as like an orphan. She had her dad, she was close with her dad, but she had no mothering. So you have a motherless mother who then is trying to mother in a difficult situation. And
without the skill or the tools to be able to do that.
No skill or tools, and hasn't been mothered. Hasn't been loved on.
Doesn't have the nurturing.
Doesn't have any nurturing. And then marries someone who doesn't really want to marry her, and then he ends up cheating on her and leaving her, and also she'd never worked. So suddenly she's just left with no husband, none of the framework that she was familiar with. Yeah.
How did your dad leaving affect you? We've talked a lot about your mom. We haven't really talked about your dad, and it's always better to have two parents around, generally.
I mean, that was that was obviously a devastating blow, and I think I had to so quickly focus on my mom. It's funny, I haven't thought, not funny. It was awful. He was already in love with someone else. He married that person who's, now we have a close relationship. He's been married to her over 30 years. She's lovely. He was an alcoholic at the time and an admitted alcoholic and has progressed down that road. So he not only left physically and left my mom and left me, I think that would be my biggest resentment that I've already worked through, is that he left me holding the bag, so to speak. Not that he had an awareness of that, but that would be, even more than leaving the marriage, it would be, how could you leave your child to be dealing with this situation?
Has he ever answered to those issues?
No, he doesn't. No. He won't speak about anything emotional. He doesn't really know us, and he's very walled off.
So how did you come to grips with that then? If he didn't come out and admit what he had done and apologize for it.
Yeah, the fourth step, baby. I love the 12 steps for that. The fourth step is, I just did another one, like a big in-depth 2-page 80-question thing on each resentment, and he was on there for that. And I look through all of that and look through my part in it and see that he, sadly, that was the best he could do, and he is still doing the best he can do. He's also got his own childhood wounds, and he's a active alcoholic. So he doesn't, again, talk about hardware store, no loaf of bread. I don't take it personally because I've worked through it, but I don't have a dad. I don't feel that I have a dad.
And I think that's an important piece of when we do self-examination and living this examined life, which we're talking about today, right? Because I got to a point in my adult life where I wasn't getting from my mother what I had hoped to get from my mother. Mm-hmm. And was it worth having a relationship with her going forward if I wasn't going to get those things?
Well, that's a really good point too that my therapist made to me, which was, your family's giving you love, including your dad, but it's in a way that isn't what you want or need. But in other words, you're saying, I want apples and they're giving oranges. Now, I wasn't seeing it at all, but once she gave that perspective, I would notice, if I was around him and he'd reach over and kind of tap my knee, I would just go, oh, he loves me. So I would take his little tiny gestures and interpret that. But am I now around him? Do I call him? Do I go down there? No, because I don't want to put myself in that situation.
So for me, the definition for me of being able to continue to have a relationship with my mother was that I felt it wasn't malicious, right? That she didn't do the things that she did on purpose,
right?
Potentially say the things that she said on purpose. That, like you said about your mom, not having a lot of tools in the toolbox, didn't have, the frame of mind from being raised by other parents, and just trying to do it on their own. Mm-hmm. That's how I realized that I was going to be okay with that relationship, that she did the best she could with what she had.
Right.
And it wasn't a justification. It was me actually coming to grips with, okay, she did the best that she can. I get that. I have this fantasy in my head about the mother that I wanted to have. I'm not going to have that mother.
Yeah. See, the grieving of that, I don't know how long that grieving goes on, but I still...
Okay, I think it
goes on forever.
I agree.
I'll have Father's Day and you'll see all the Facebook posts, and I have friends whose dads are their, champions and allies. It's painful. Yeah.
Yeah, my mother... my mother passed away at the beginning of this year, and she would have had a birthday here in September. And somebody had asked me, they said, is the date of her death or her birthday going to be the most difficult for you? And I had never thought of either one about that. But when her birthday came up, it was a sad day for me.
Yeah. Yeah, then you really can never have, maybe there's some hope while they're still alive, but once they're gone, you'll never have that.
Well, and I ask about the father scenario because, as you know, I had a very difficult upbringing, if any upbringing at all, with my father, and that continued on till the day he died.
Yeah.
And somebody would always ask me, I've always get asked this question: were you able to talk to your father and have peace with it before he died? And I said, well, the question you should be asking me is, did I actually even want to have that conversation with him? And I didn't.
Yeah.
I had an experience once after my father died. I was in the Canadian Rockies, and I was with my wife on vacation, and I was looking at how beautiful everything was. And I just got the most overwhelming feeling that my father decided to come in and take responsibility for his absence in my life.
Yeah.
And it was an incredibly overwhelming feeling of sort of forgiveness on both of our parts, because I know I was not the easiest kid as a growing up, that I gave him a run for his money.
I find that hard to believe.
Right? So I don't know. I just had this, it was just such a peaceful, wonderful feeling to finally come to peace with him as a person. And it felt to me like he came to some peace with me.
That's lovely.
And it was a really, really lovely feeling. So I'm not 100% convinced that even after the person dies that it's completely hopeless.
No, I love that. Yeah. And my dad and I were very close. We were closer than he was with it was my dad and I. He was closest to me versus my sister and brother, I think, and until I was about 10 or 11. So we had a really strong relationship at one point, and I know he loves me in his heart. So maybe I'll have that opportunity.
Yeah, it was easier for my dad to be emotionally present after his death than before.
Yeah, that would be mine too.
Which is kind of an odd concept, but
that's funny.
it sure felt genuine to me.
Yeah.
So two of us in the room are divorced, and one of us has a long-term marriage.
Nice.
Here. Getting married and being married to the person you're married to, we tend to fall back into what we're familiar with, right? These patterns, whether they're good, bad, or indifferent for us, and whatever feels familiar to us, we fall into that. Was that your case?
Yes, but if the tradition is you marry your dad, but I married my mom. So I married someone who had a lot of that kind of, I'll talk about her when she was not well, but that more controlling, moody, manipulative. I almost want to call it the dark feminine, but I hate to call it masculine or feminine. So I think it's interesting because my dad, I was, looked like Tom Selleck and super attractive and masculine and could do anything and cheated on my mom a lot, right? So I went nowhere near the jocks and the alpha males. So I married someone who's, a clothing designer and all of these other more feminine traits. But then I was repeating a pattern to some degree of the dysfunction with the relationship with my mom. So, so I would say if there was any repeating, it wasn't me marrying my dad. It was more in the other. It was, or marrying not my dad. Maybe that's another thing you do, is you just try to do the opposite of what you saw.
The antithesis of what you were.
The antithesis. What you was like, this guy won't cheat on me. Yeah.
So how long did it take you to kind of figure out you had married your mom?
Oh gosh, I don't know.
I mean, was there one day?
By the way, they were so close. They loved each other. They got along really well.
But was there one day it's like, oh my God, I've married my mom. I don't know if I can do this any longer, or was it just a pattern? No, because
I don't think it was that cut. I don't think he's that much like my mom. I mean, I just think more, if you were going to say, did you repeat a pattern? I would say it was more in that. I would either say I did the antithesis of the dad or more in the direction of my mom. But no, I just think that in hindsight, of course, what I brought in from all that family upbringing and the family system and trauma, I had no idea was operating. So that's scary, because it's like someone's driving the car and it's not you.
Right.
Did you have a fantasy in your head because of coming from a broken home at a point? Did you have this fantasy in your head about who you were going to marry, how that life was going to go?
No, I didn't really think about getting married or having kids. I was more, I wanted to be in a monogamous, loving partnership, but I wasn't ever really thinking about reforming the family unit.
And that wasn't from the trauma, or was it just?
Could have been. I mean, I certainly didn't have a high regard for marriage, after what I'd seen, I was pretty not sure that I wanted to do that, and comfortable in my own independence and ability to work and provide for myself. So it was going to be only if I was really, really in a strong love partnership with aligned values. And that's how it was up until we were married, when he became a different person. But before that, he was a really strong partner.
And how was it becoming a mom for yourself after being a mom to your mom?
Right. So if only I'd known that bucket had run dry from being a mom to my mom, which, as I said, I still was not consciously aware of. I really, really wanted to have a baby and really wanted to have a girl. We actually read a book about how to have a boy or a girl. And so I was very excited to be pregnant and had a great pregnancy. But as soon as I had the baby, I had postpartum depression and all sorts of I had a really difficult labor. Talk about the body, by the way. Before I go into the child being a mom, I think it's interesting to trace back when I think now of having an autoimmune disease and how that functions. Basically, autoimmune, your body's attacking itself, right? It's basically getting its wires crossed saying, right, 911, something's wrong. So something's wrong, we're sending the troops. I was born and 3 months later had an inguinal hernia. So I had major surgery at 3 months old. Then I had the surgery on my face at 8 years old. Then I was raped in a freshman year in college. I was drugged and raped by a stranger. Which I don't have a memory of per se, but my body, I'm sure, does. Then I have.
Let's go back to that for just a second. I want to gloss over that.
Oh, okay.
You don't have a memory of that, but you have a feeling of that? Or?
I was at a party and a freshman fraternity party, and I woke up with it. It was happening to me when I woke up by someone I'd never seen before.
Okay. So
they'd given me something in the drink.
Gotcha.
And then I just got out of that room. Yeah. But I just think for my body to register major surgery at 3 months old where they're cutting you open, major surgery at 8 years old, raped by a stranger at 18, then a horrific birth, 3-day birth, water wouldn't go into labor, wouldn't go into contractions, but my water had broken while I was sleeping, forced Pitocin labor, 3 hours of pushing. So I think my body had a lot of different things teed up that it started to believe we're unsafe, things are unsafe, adding to my overall idea that the planet was a bit unsafe. So it started out with that really rough birth, and I do think that played into postpartum depression and me not doing well those first little while, and then it triggered my past of being swamped by someone else's need.
Right.
Yeah, which I didn't know would happen, but it re-triggered the whole my whole childhood of feeling I can't handle this. This is way more than I can handle, and then the sleep deprivation and postpartum depression, everything, coalesced into a big nightmare.
So I call that the stacking effect.
Oh.
A number of things start stacking on top
Jenga.
of each other. Exactly like Jenga. Just make sure you pull the right piece out at the right time, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of those things, at least for me personally, caused me to start re-examining my life. Mm-hmm. Did that, at that point, cause you another point within your journey to kind of re-examine?
Yeah, I think if we talk about fear, I've gotten exponentially more fearful as I've gotten older. So I just was recently talking about this with someone, is that when I look now and say, oh, that decision, I would have told you that was the perfect, anyone who met this person, everyone who knew this person, everyone who knew us would say you are an ideal match.
You're talking about your ex-husband.
My husband.
Yeah.
Best friend, partner, lover, same values, everything. Turns out that was a complete facade.
So he wasn't really that person. And how long did it take before you discovered that?
The day we got married, he switched into the other person.
Really? Like what changed so drastically about his...
He wouldn't... So about a week before the wedding... So this is someone who pursued me, wanted to get engaged, wanted to buy a house together, wanted to get married, was really pushing, But, we had a great sexual connection, emotional connection, mental connection, all the things. We moved here, bought a house. We were getting married a week before the wedding. He said, I don't, just very coldly, I don't think I want to marry you.
Just like that?
Mm-hmm. In bed, while we're in bed together.
And this was before the wedding?
A week.
So
people in town, we have a house together.
How did you move forward to get married after?
Well, so I'm in shock.
Yeah.
So I remember climbing out of the bed, crawling out to, like, I don't even know what are you talking about? What are you saying? He goes, why would that, why? You're my best friend. Why can't I tell you that?
Okay.
So I'm just spinning. I go to my trusted sources and they say, oh, he's fine.
Just cold feet.
Yeah. And meanwhile, I'm trying to, I have 1 week of this strange thing versus a year and a half of the person I knew. So what am I going to trust? The wedding was stressful. The night of the wedding, he was really cruel, and the honeymoon was not great, and we came home early. So now in that first year, I'm in complete shock and devastation. First of all, I've lost my person. I don't know who this person is. He would cry if I went near him. He told me he was about to kill himself. I was saying, you need to get help now. You need to go to therapy now. He said, I'm going to go, but if you ever bring it up again, I'll never go.
How long were you together before you got married?
Almost 2 years.
Yeah, and you saw none of that behavior before?
None of that. I mean, really, the people who have unpacked it since then have said, because I still to this, even after I left him, was like, I don't know what happened. They were like, no, he needed to marry me. He wanted to marry me to have a certain life that he wanted to have that was not authentic to who he actually is or what he's capable of. My judgment and the universe and other people was so badly shattered by that relationship that I've never recovered.
You don't strike me as someone who would be easy to fool. You seem very much in touch with yourself and really connected to yourself.
Yeah. Wow. Yep. Yeah. I remember going to therapy that first year and saying, part of me is dying. I will never recover my faith in myself or the planet after this. Why I stayed, that's what I think about now. But, we owned a home, we were married, and he would just, kind of like any abusive relationship, he would be that old person every now and then, just enough for me to go, oh, that stopped sleeping with me then, so stopped all physical and emotional intimacy from the day we got married.
And how long were you married to?
10 years.
So you were able to go a whole decade?
So what happened was, that first year I'm completely distraught. I decided to go and guess what? The therapist, who's a very old-fashioned therapist who I shall not name, basically makes it my problem.
Oh, okay. Which happens a lot, unfortunately.
And I'm thinking, I don't think it's my, but okay, that's the only thing I can try to change. So I'm trying to do what I can. Then another year in, then I get pregnant. And then the baby's there, and I'm really focused on the baby. Plus I'm in major distress from postpartum. So finally the baby's, she was 4. I'm not doing my math correctly, but yeah, she's about 4. And now I've had a couple years of Al-Anon, and then I'm starting to say, okay, no more of this. Relationship, which looked very perfect on the outside. As our marriage therapist at the time said, Amy, there's 2 types of people. People who care about how things look and people who care about how things are. And those 2 don't go together. When he asked my ex-husband, what's your happiest moment of this marriage? He actually said a moment that was one of the most horrifying for me. So that's a perfect, he said, at the Christmas party this year, we were dancing at our company party, at his company party, and everyone was looking at us and admiring us or envying us. And I remember being on that dance floor, being just so lonely and alone. So it took a lot of courage to leave that marriage and to get divorced and have a splintered family. I really didn't want that for my daughter. So I stayed longer than I should have. But I remember really feeling like I'm going to show my daughter what love is and what a partnership is and a marriage is. And also I was literally physically dying. I was 113 pounds. My hair was falling out. It was a really untenable relationship to be in for a lot of reasons.
So you didn't listen to your intuition?
Well, no, this is what's crazy. My intuition was, he was, the greatest acting job of all time.
No, I'm talking about...
I was already in. I was married and we owned a home and all the things. I think that's where I think it's not just intuition, it's codependency. It's, I don't want to be divorced. It's, I don't know where I would start over. It's, I don't want to have a failed perfectionism. I never had a gut intuition. If I had been like, I want to leave, I would have left, which I did once I had that gut. Like, you've got to either go or you're going to die here.
So it was really the fear talking to you.
Yeah.
at that point.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's interesting that I stayed that long, but as I said, really, really loved him, and he kept kind of popping up as the other version every now and then, and I kept making accommodations as I did as a kid, right? Well, it's not that bad. People would say, in fact, he said in therapy, I don't cheat on you and I make a ton of money, so if you want more than that, you should get out. I was like, oh, yeah, I'm getting out.
So what was the ultimate breaking point for you?
Knowing that I was not able in that relationship to, not only I wasn't receiving love and emotional and physical intimacy, but I wasn't able to give it.
Do you feel like you've been able to forgive yourself?
No.
Can you?
I just wrote that on a sheet I did. I said, I cannot forgive myself for marrying him. I can't forgive myself for having a baby with him. Those are the two things that no matter how much work I've done, as I said, it destroyed my trust in myself and the universe and God. I had to do a resentment on God the other day. Mm-hmm. I was like, what the fuck? Yeah. I mean, I'm a good, I get into that too. I'm a good person. I was a great wife. I'm a great mom. I'm of service. I am charitable. and it's not like then I get a unicorn in the backyard, but at least I don't get this horrific marriage situation, which I couldn't have seen coming. It's not like he was that person before and I chose that. Right. He's a completely radically different person. Mm-hmm. And then a child that ends up having a lot of issues, in part, of course, because of who her father is. Yeah. And then a divorce and going back and forth and things that happened at that house when I wasn't there, which were really damaging to her. So then I get a child that has damage and issues. And so all of it, when I look back, I don't, my sponsor in 12 Steps said, well, you can trust all of that because that's how you got to where you are now. And I do not agree with that.
So you're not there yet?
I think that why couldn't I have married someone great and been happily married? I don't think it's like, oh, great, you had to have that because now you're here. I think that was tremendous. That's like saying if you were in a horrific car crash and lost a leg. I mean, that's emotionally how that feels to me. I've never been the same.
Dane and I talk a little bit about this and whether he agrees with me or not about predetermined destiny.
Yeah.
And maybe it becomes just a justification in my own mind, but I think you had to go through that, right? Because you could have picked somebody else, hypothetically, and everything, but that wasn't Amy Cooper's journey through life.
Maybe on my deathbed I'll feel that way, or in another 10 years or something. I still feel like it's incredibly unfair.
What about the notion that when you're growing up, you get a blueprint about what love should look like? Mm-hmm. And that, at least at the time that you were growing up, both of your parents were incredibly self-focused. And that you're being a really sensitive person, you're going to figure out what they need in order for you to take care of them and to manage their pain.
Yep.
And to the degree that they have that pain, you're going to feel compelled to take care of it.
Yeah. As
you did, especially after your dad left. And I don't think that blueprint ever goes away until we understand how important how important it is to look at that and recognize that it's more than likely that this man represented that blueprint in a way that you weren't aware of at the time.
Yeah.
Because that blueprint is not something that we are consciously aware of.
Right. Like the person driving the car that's not you. Yeah, you're right.
But it certainly dictates the choices that we make and the people that we bring into our lives. So I guess the more that you understand really that, and I'm not necessarily disagreeing with Kim, but the idea that you were living the blueprint that you were taught, mm-hmm. and you're blaming yourself for that, which seems really quite sad to me.
Well, and I guess if I don't blame myself, this is a really good question, because this goes to self-exploration. If you're willing to do the work to look at yourself, and you're willing to see the things that are really difficult, are you then blaming yourself, blaming God or the universe, or are you blaming someone else? Or are you not blaming anyone? I mean, so don't you feel like that's an important piece of self-exploration, is to know how you're going to handle that?
I do, and what I try to help people understand is that we should blame people that do things on purpose to harm us. That's what jails are for,
Yes.
Right? When people do things on purpose.
Well, there has to be an acknowledgement of the victimization.
Right. But in my idea, that to blame should be just in the category of the person that did it on purpose. Mm. And that the other part is holding the person accountable for their behavior, which is really different than blame. That the person is responsible, but they're not to be blamed because they didn't do it on purpose. And that what they owe you is restitution for the crimes that they've committed.
You know what it is? Because I got teary, and that's how I know it's the truth, is that if I forgive myself for that, then it's like that's the ultimate acceptance that that's how things played out. Like I think, and when I look at my resentments, that's what, if I'm holding on to it, it's because I don't want to grieve the fact that I can't change it. And if I blame myself, I somehow feel that I can fix it, whether I fix it through future behaviors or something else. But if I just say, I forgive you, you did the best you could, then that's my story. I mean, my story is I married someone who ended up being a monster. And my story is I have a daughter that's really damaged. And my story is I'm single and alone and, in the world. And maybe that's part of holding on to it, is to feel that if I accept it, then I can't change it.
And I can totally appreciate why it's hard to come to terms with it, but I'm not necessarily talking about what happened on the outside. I'm not talking about your ex-husband, your daughter, or any of those people. I'm talking more about the way that you live in relationship to yourself. I'm not asking you to forgive anybody other than yourself.
No, but I'm saying if I forgive myself, I have to accept that this is what happened.
Yes, that's true. But in order to be able to move on, I guess in a certain way, coming to peace with yourself seems like a really important ingredient in
okay, here's another good question. If I'm not forgiving myself, what am I getting out of that?
You're getting a familiar feeling of not ever being good enough, and that same old feeling like no matter how hard you try, it's not going to be okay because you're dealing. It's like it's that little girl wanting to.
Yeah, it's the little girl.
Feeling so helpless and desperate and doing everything she can to try to make a situation better that you have absolutely no ability to manage because you're a kid.
Yeah,
and because we don't want to face that reality, we're just going to fall back into our default again. And I think that's the point about self-examination. I think you make a good point, because it is really hard to do. I mean, you got emotional just talking about trying to accept the reality of it, right? And this is why most people won't peel off enough layers to get granular enough to make that change.
Well, because it's the feelings, it's the feeling play. It's
you don't want to relive
it's always
it.
Avoiding the grief or
Right.
the pain. Yeah. But I think that's the most important point. What you said is that it's the little girl feeling like she could have done it differently when
you couldn't
have. Yeah.
Actually, you did a masterful job, but you still failed because there's no kid in the world that can live in an adult world and take care of really damaged parents, even though, man, do we ever try.
Yeah, do we ever try?
I remember when I was about 16 or 17, I was at the dinner table with my family, had a brother and sister and parents, and I spent most of my teenage years under the influence of drugs, mostly marijuana. And I remember sitting at the table, and I was really like stoned out of my mind. And I'm watching my parents, and I thought I was thinking this to myself. These people hate each other. They can't stand the sight of each other. They should get a divorce. Unfortunately, because I was so high, I said it out loud in front of my siblings and my parents.
Yeah.
They looked at me like, what?
Yeah.
And then I thought to myself, oh my God, I can't believe I just said that out loud. Right. I started laughing because I thought it was hysterical.
Yeah.
Nobody else was laughing at the
Nobody
table.
else thought it was funny.
It was your true serum.
Oh, that's funny.
I was just 5 years premature.
Right.
They did get divorced, but it was about 5 years later.
Yeah.
And they looked at me with horror, like, how could you say such a thing?
Yeah.
We love each other, even though they treated each other like absolute, they hated each other.
Okay, but so you saw that model, and then you've been married a long time. So you didn't do the blueprint.
The reason I believe, or at least one of the reasons why I've been married as long as I have, is that, first of all, I met my wife when I was only 20 years old. I was really young. Mm-hmm. And I fell so madly in love with this person that I could not believe there was such a creature on the face of the earth, right? And that she was interested in me.
Yeah.
Right? That was the part that completely blew me away.
Yeah.
And, as our relationship progressed, we're very, very different people. I'm a barbarian and she's, an angel in a lot of ways. but like all of us, she has her issues and I have mine. And I was doing a lot of therapy at the time, and she was not. And, it got to the point where I said to her, if this relationship is going to work, I'm not the only one that's got problems here.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean no offense, but you got to get some help yourself because, you look at me like I'm the guy that's got all the problems, and your family is, perfect. And I got some really bad news for you. It's not true. So luckily enough, she got into therapy and found somebody that really helped her at that particular moment in time. And I really think that that's what made the difference, because we've been, together for over 40 years, and everybody says they can't believe that she's still married to me. Nobody ever says they can't believe I'm married to her.
Funny. Yeah, of course.
Because she's an angel, and I'm still a barbarian in some ways. But it really was self-examination on both of our parts that was the glue that.
Well, that's when my daughter
together.
knows a little bit about my marriage story, and she's obviously had her own experience of her father being this kind of Jekyll Hyde situation, and she said, "Oh, Mom, your story scares me because it's like you didn't know," and I said, "It does not matter. You don't have to know everything. What you have to know is that your partner is willing to seek help, because trauma will happen, suffering will happen, addiction will happen, stuff will happen. If you have a partner who's willing to go and seek their own help when they need it, you're good."
It's wise counsel.
Because you're not going to just sit there and figure everything out with someone. Right. But I ended up with someone who would not do any level of self-exploration or healing.
Well, she also asked me what my requirements were to get married, and they weren't huge. The most important one was that I watched my father be serially unfaithful to my mom the whole time they were married, even before that I was born. I had an experience of, feeling my mother's perceived self-loathing as a result of being pregnant with me. Mm-hmm. And I said to my wife, if you can promise me not that you may not meet somebody or be attracted to someone, but that you won't do anything without talking to me first.
Nice.
Because in my experience, betrayal is really almost impossible to heal. And I didn't want to have to go through that. And luckily enough, I chose someone who is not that kind of a person to begin with, but she was willing to make that commitment to me that no matter what took place, and it worked both ways, obviously, that if something came up, that there would be no action taken until we had a chance to talk about it.
Yeah.
And that really made a big difference in reassuring me that I was making the right choice at the time.
Yeah.
Along with the fact that I told her I was a surfer and that all of our vacations would be tropically oriented.
She was like, I'm in.
And that wasn't such a bad thing either.
Yep,
so
I'm all in.
That worked out okay.
So Amy, in our last few minutes here of the conversation, I want to talk a little bit about you coming through the other side of the marriage. Mm-hmm. Still dealing with the after effect of that, dealing with a daughter that has some mental health issues that you needed to really be involved in and manage, and how you became a successful entrepreneur after all of that.
After all of that, well, so I left, she was 5 years old, and so the shit hadn't hit the fan at that point. And I think she was about 9 when I decided to open my own business. And at that point, I'd been a consultant in writing for different people in branding and marketing. But right before I opened Plum Goods, I had worked as a brand manager for another company. So I'd gone back into that full-time corporate life after being at home and working part-time and working when I wanted to and working when she was at school and being a full-time mom. I was only there 6 months, and I was looking around thinking, if I'm going to work this hard to make someone else's company run well, I'm going to do it for myself. And I got a lot of encouragement, actually from my dad at that point too, who'd had his own store when I was growing up. And he said, go for it. You're young enough. If you fail now, you can start over. And my mom was a big supporter too. So I started the business when Olivia was only 9.
So as we end here, I usually ask Dana what kind of the major takeaways from our discussion for the last hour that we have, but since you're now in the hot seat and did most of the talking and rather eloquently and emotionally and vulnerable and the whole thing, which we appreciate. Again, we're talking about living an examined life. What are your biggest takeaways from not only doing that, immersing yourself into examining who Amy Cooper is, but what are your kind of takeaways now? Because I think it's a process that it's a continual process, right? It's not that we sit there for a month, 6 months, 6 years. Mm-hmm. It kind of continues to morph into something else. So kind of what are your big takeaways right now? What does the Amy Cooper of the future look like to you?
Well, I guess the thing that came to me when you first were talking is that I'm really proud that I broke or shifted a lot of the generational systems and behaviors that were in place so that my daughter actually is much, much farther along at 20 than I ever was in terms of self-exploration, self-awareness, and healing generational trauma. So I'm really proud of that. I think she has a much better shot than someone who'd never gotten that. And that is due to my own willingness. I think I am very proud of myself for having a strong willingness to look at myself, look at my life, get better, not only for myself, but for my daughter and my whole family and friends system. So yeah, I guess my takeaway is when I talk about myself in this perspective, I'm proud of how far I've come. And it used to drive me nuts when I first got into Al-Anon, and I'd see people in there and they were saying, yeah, I'm going to be coming here till I die. I've come here 20 years. And I'd be like, I thought let's go. Let's come here and check it off and be done with this. But now I say I will be exploring myself, learning, growing, healing, learning to forgive myself and others, trying to get that stronger sense of who I am and why I'm here, how I can be of service and give and receive love better than I ever have. I want to do that till my deathbed. So this conversation helps me to see, as I said, how far I've come. So gosh, the Amy Cooper of the future, who knows? I mean, I could evolve into the next level spiritual being. I don't know.
That was very well said.
It was? Oh, that's
yeah.
A
You're going to have to
compliment.
come back
Thank
next time. I think I've been replaced.
You may have. We may have a third co-host, or
Exactly.
people are going to comment. Can you guys just be quiet and just have Amy do the podcast
right.
from now? Amy, thank you so much
Oh, it's such a pleasure.
for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So we appreciate Amy being our first guest here. It was quite an eye-opening discussion with her. She brought up a number of good points in regards to self-examination, and I think it's prudent for us to kind of go over a couple of those before we end this podcast. So, Dana, what do you think are probably the two biggest takeaways from our discussion with Amy?
Well, Kim, I think that the one of the most important points that she made was that the first therapist that she went to see was someone that pathologized her, and it appeared to use the medical model of diagnosing her and then telling her that, and agreeing with her that there was something wrong with her and that it was her fault that the marriage was failing. Now, I have to hand it to her for sort of recognizing that wasn't true, number one, and that it was harmful to her actually to be told those things and to be categorized in the way that she was categorized. So she then went about finding another therapist that she connected with, who apparently was quite lovely and capable, and that it was a very much of a healing experience for her because that second therapist didn't pathologize her, but helped her understand, the nature of her suffering and why the marriage was not working out and how to be more true to herself, and really helped her get to a place where self-discovery and looking at herself, it worked really well for her. So that's something that I think is really, really important. As I've talked about in earlier podcasts, I have a great objection to the medical model of therapy where, again, you go to see somebody and you're feeling bad about yourself, and that person agrees with you that there's something wrong with you. And I don't see how that's going to help. All it does is make you feel more ashamed of yourself and more inadequate. So in seeking a therapist, I think it's a really good idea to get referrals from satisfied customers, number one. Somebody who's had a positive experience with that therapist and has been helped to feel better about themselves rather than told that there's something dreadfully wrong with them that needs to be treated and that somehow they're mentally ill because they're suffering. So that's something that I really want to stress to people, is to be very selective when they're going about finding somebody to help them in their journey.
In your experience, in your clinical practice, is it fairly common that you've seen where people do get kind of put in a box or kind of painted in that corner, and that they spend a significant amount of time there being told they're the problem?
Kim, it's an incredibly tragic experience that I have with people sometimes. I think about this one fellow who came to see me a few years ago, and he was sent to me by a psychiatrist who diagnosed him as being bipolar and suffering from a severe mental illness, basically, and she was treating him with some pretty intense drugs. And he walked in the door and sat down, and I thought to myself, boy, this person sure doesn't feel bipolar to me. And we had some discussions about his history, and it turns out that he was born very prematurely, weighing about 3 pounds. And through the miracle of medical science, he was able to survive. But for the first 3 months of his life, he died almost every day and was resuscitated. Now, that's not a good way to start one's life, to have to experience that kind of trauma over and over and over again when you're so vulnerable and so little. And in my experience, he wasn't bipolar at all. He was really suffering from post-traumatic stress, but it wasn't recognized because we don't necessarily look at premature babies who are dying in the hospital daily as someone that could actually be suffering terribly. We just look at them as miracles of survival.
Right, because PTSD, I think, generally is thought of as warfare or wounded soldiers and soldiers who've been in combat and so on and so forth versus a serious traumatic event or a series of traumatic events.
Right.
And in your, again, going back to your clinical practice, and again, Amy brought up the subject of PTSD. I've been a sufferer of PTSD as well and had to understand that over a period of time. What's the percentage of patients that come in your door that have suffered some level of PTSD? And do they do they recognize it before they come in?
I would say that probably 70 to 75% of the people that come to see me come from traumatic backgrounds and could, theoretically be diagnosed as having post-traumatic stress. And I would say maybe half of the people that have come here understand that what they have gone through has caused significant trauma in their lives. People rationalize incredible amounts of abuse because they just assume it's normal because it happened in their family and they didn't know any different. And they were just assuming that most of the kids in the neighborhood were going through the same things that they were going through. So I do spend a lot of time educating people and helping them understand that that there is a reason for their symptoms. They don't occur in a vacuum.
So when we talk about the importance of self-examination, PTSD would be one of those blocks that would prevent us probably from bettering ourselves, understanding ourselves.
Well, I think that one of the most common reactions to being mistreated as a child, whether it's abuse or neglect, is to become self-destructive and to become very self-critical and to look at yourself as causing the problem. I've rarely met a person who didn't believe that somehow they caused the abuse or did something to make it happen or they deserved it or whatever, because children really don't have the ability to understand that they understand that what's happening to them makes them feel terrible, but oftentimes they're told that it's their fault or they ask for it or they just make that assumption.
Well, there's a lot of things that we need to talk about still on self-examination that we'll get to in future episodes. But I think this was a good start and hope that our audience continues to join us in future episodes. So thanks.
Thank you.
We appreciate our listeners and are interested in your comments and suggestions. Feel free to email us at fearmeoutpodcast@gmail.com. If you are interested in becoming a sponsor for this podcast, please email us at fearmeoutpodcast@gmail.com. Thank you for listening. See you next time.